It's showtime, when truth steps into the light. It's showtime is not a phrase meant to entertain. It is the moment truth decides it will no longer remain hidden, not announced by noise, but by inevitability. A turning point where concealment loses its authority. For a long time, the narcissist believed they were directing the game. They moved pieces quietly, assumed control, and trusted that no one was watching closely. They thought strategy could replace accountability. What they failed to realize was this: they were never behind the scenes. They were standing on a stage the entire time, observed by a light they did not control. When they targeted you, they believed they were isolating you. They assumed pressure would weaken you, silence would erase you, and distortion would bury you. But targeting you had the opposite effect. Every attempt to undermine your name widened the spotlight. Every calculated move drew attention upward rather than downward. They believed they were digging in darkness, unaware the ground was illuminated. This is how deception always miscalculates. It assumes silence means absence. It confuses patience with blindness. But truth does not rush. It waits until falsehood overexposes itself. The era of manipulation in shadows cannot last forever. There comes a moment when hidden tactics lose their cover. That moment is not emotional. It is structural. It is moral. Now, exposure has begun, not because you demanded it, but because truth always steps forward when its time arrives. The stage is set, the light is fixed, and escape is no longer possible. When the lights come on, the things hidden the longest are revealed first. When the narcissist believes they are playing the game, the narcissist does not enter relationships with reverence. They enter with calculation. Where you see a human soul, they see a position to control. Where you assume sincerity, they assess leverage. To them, life is not a shared journey of responsibility and conscience. It is a game of advantage, visibility, and dominance. That is why, when they turned their attention toward you, it was never accidental. You were not chosen because you were weak. You were chosen because you carried something they did not possess: steadiness, credibility, moral weight. They believed you could be managed. They observed your restraint and mistook it for fear. They noted your patience and labeled it passivity. They watched your refusal to retaliate and concluded you lacked power. In their framework, strength only exists where aggression lives. So they began to play. Quiet distortions first. Subtle suggestions planted in conversations you were not present for. Small narrative shifts meant to test how far they could bend reality without resistance. They believed that if they repeated a version of events often enough, truth itself would tire and step aside. To the narcissist, control does not require truth, it requires consensus. And consensus, they believe, can be engineered. They expected you to react. They anticipated an emotional response, defensiveness, explanation, visible distress. That reaction would have confirmed their power and justified escalation. It would have given them permission to play louder, harder, more publicly. But something unexpected happened. You did not rush to correct every falsehood. You did not chase every misunderstanding. You did not surrender your integrity just to regain your voice. Your restraint disrupted their strategy. Because narcissistic manipulation depends on movement. It requires friction. It feeds on reaction. Silence, when rooted in discernment, becomes unmanageable to them. They cannot read it. They cannot predict it. And they cannot control what they cannot provoke. Still, convinced they were winning, they continued. They believed time was on their side. They believed repetition would exhaust truth. They believed their confidence could substitute for substance. What they did not understand is this: truth does not weaken under pressure, it clarifies. Every lie they told required another lie to support it. Every manipulation demanded further distortion. The game grew heavier, more complex, more fragile, and while they believed they were tightening control, they were actually multiplying exposure. The narcissist always assumes the world operates on immediacy, that what is not corrected instantly must be false, that what is not defended must be surrendered. But moral order does not operate on their timetable. In the Christian understanding of justice, delay is not dismissal, it is examination. While they were busy managing appearances, something else was happening. Observers were noticing inconsistencies. Patterns were forming. The gap between words and character was widening. The narcissist believed they were playing you. In reality, they were revealing themselves. Every calculated move became part of a record. Every distorted narrative left residue. Every attempt to control others exposed their dependence on control itself. They did not realize that games can only be played where truth is optional, and truth was never optional in this story, only patient. By the time they sensed something was shifting, it was already too late. The structure they relied on was unstable. The stage they assumed was secure was weakening beneath their feet. They were playing a game they did not understand, on a stage they did not build, under a light they did not command. And soon, the consequences of that miscalculation would become unavoidable. The grave they dug was not external, it was internal. The narcissist does not fall because someone exposes them. They fall because something inside them can no longer hold together. What collapses first is not reputation, but coherence. At the beginning, deception feels light. They tell a story here, adjust it there, and trust their intelligence to manage the gaps. They believe memory can replace truth, and performance can replace conscience. For a time, it appears to work. But lies are not weightless. They accumulate. Each false narrative requires reinforcement. Each manipulation demands justification. Each distortion fractures something internal, quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. The grave they dug for you was never meant to be public. It was not designed as a dramatic scandal or sudden exposure. It was meant to be subtle, psychological, and isolating. And yet, without realizing it, they were digging inward. They began to forget which version of events they told to whom. Their stories shifted tone depending on the audience. What once sounded confident began to sound rehearsed. What once felt convincing began to feel hollow. Control requires consistency, and consistency is impossible without truth. As contradictions multiplied, something deeper began to erode, their capacity for genuine connection. Relationships rooted in manipulation cannot sustain warmth. Affection becomes transactional. Loyalty becomes conditional. Trust becomes surveillance. The narcissist may still be surrounded by people, but they are no longer accompanied by peace. Inside, there is tension, a constant monitoring of perception, an exhausting vigilance over image. They are never fully present, because presence would require authenticity. Meanwhile, you remain grounded, not louder, not defensive, not scrambling to correct every misrepresentation. Your steadiness becomes disorienting to them. Your silence unsettles their narrative. Your peace exposes their unrest. They expected guilt. They anticipated collapse. They prepared for emotional reaction. What they encountered instead was restraint. And restraint, when rooted in truth, becomes a mirror. The narcissist begins to sense it, that their influence no longer moves the room the way it once did, that their words require more explanation, that their authority feels thinner, more brittle. People do not confront them directly. They simply begin to hesitate. They listen more carefully. They notice inconsistencies they once overlooked. The grave deepens. Every attempt to regain control intensifies the exposure. They speak more, but convince less. They explain more, but clarify nothing. They double down, unaware that doubling down only adds weight to the collapse. What they never understood is this: you cannot build stability on distortion. The inner cost of maintaining illusion grows heavier with time. Sleep becomes restless. Thoughts loop endlessly. Suspicion replaces confidence. They begin to fear silence, not because silence accuses, but because silence leaves them alone with themselves. This is the moment where the internal grave becomes unavoidable. They are no longer reacting to you. They are reacting to the pressure of their own contradictions. The structure within them cannot support the image they project. The gap between who they pretend to be and who they are has grown too wide. And so, without you lifting a finger, without public confrontation, without revenge or spectacle, the ground beneath them begins to give way. The grave they dug was never yours. It was formed by their refusal to live in truth, their dependence on control, and their belief that consequence could be delayed indefinitely. But moral gravity does not disappear. It waits, and now the weight has become too heavy to carry, when the stage can no longer hide the truth. Every illusion survives only under certain conditions. It needs selective lighting, controlled audiences, and limited scrutiny. The narcissist understood this instinctively. They did not rely on truth to sustain influence, but on atmosphere, carefully shaped conversations, and curated impressions. As long as the light remained dim, the performance appeared convincing, but no stage can remain dark forever. When clarity enters, illusion does not argue, it weakens. Truth does not advance through confrontation. It advances through alignment, and alignment changes how everything is seen. What once felt impressive begins to feel strained under closer attention. Stories sound rehearsed, confidence feels defensive, emotion appears calculated rather than lived. Under stronger light, technique replaces sincerity. This shift rarely announces itself dramatically. People do not accuse at first. They hesitate. They listen more carefully. They notice how explanations shift. Awareness replaces confusion. The narcissist senses this change before anyone else. They feel the room grow colder. Affirmation no longer arrives automatically. Influence now requires effort instead of command. What once worked instinctively now demands maintenance. The stage that once amplified them begins to magnify their inconsistencies. In response, they attempt to adjust the performance. They speak with more intensity, mistaking volume for authority. They repeat narratives, mistaking repetition for credibility. They use moral language, hoping familiarity can replace integrity. But light does not respond to volume, it responds to coherence. Under sustained clarity, motives become visible. Patterns emerge. Contradictions surface. Observers notice how loyalty is demanded but rarely returned, how accountability is preached but never practiced. The narcissist grows unsettled. They tighten control, believing pressure can restore order. They search for someone to blame, hoping displacement can preserve image. Yet the more aggressively they manage perception, the more visible the fractures become. Control turns conspicuous. Manipulation becomes obvious. This is when the stage itself begins to fail. A platform built on illusion was never designed to carry weight. It was meant to display image, not endure examination. As scrutiny increases, the structure weakens. What once protected them now exposes them. Meanwhile, you remain unchanged. You do not campaign for validation. You do not correct every distortion. You do not attempt to reclaim the stage. Your consistency becomes the contrast. Not through argument, but through presence. Not through defense, but through restraint. Truth does not chase falsehood. It stands still long enough for falsehood to collapse under its own effort. This is why exposure often looks quiet. It unfolds through private realization, revisited memories, and patterns finally understood. Confusion lifts, clarity settles. The narcissist cannot function in this environment. They relied on ambiguity to maintain influence. They depended on emotional fog to avoid accountability. When clarity enters, their authority dissolves. Not through attack, but through irrelevance. The stage that once served them becomes their liability. The visibility they sought now works against them. The performance continues, but its power is gone. What remains is not mystery or admiration, but the truth the stage can no longer hide. They realize the target did not collapse, but they did. The person they targeted did not collapse. The pressure they applied did not produce the outcome they expected. The confusion, fear, and emotional breakdown they anticipated never appeared. This realization does not arrive suddenly. It forms slowly, through observation. They notice that their words no longer provoke the same reaction. Their presence no longer unsettles you. Their tactics no longer shift your behavior. You remain steady. The narcissist expected resistance or submission. They prepared for arguments, explanations, or visible distress. What they encounter instead is restraint, composure, and emotional distance they cannot penetrate. This is where the internal alarm begins. Narcissistic power depends on visible effect. They need confirmation that their actions still influence the target. When that confirmation disappears, uncertainty replaces confidence. They begin to replay interactions. They revisit moments where control should have worked. They question why escalation produced no reaction, and why silence did not result in submission. The attention they once directed outward turns inward. Gradually, they realize something has reversed. The scrutiny they tried to impose on you has returned to them. The tension they attempted to create now lives inside their own mind. You have become still. They have become restless. This shift unsettles them more than open confrontation ever could. They are no longer measuring your responses. They are monitoring their own diminishing influence. In response, they attempt escalation. They intensify narratives, sharpen accusations, and search for reactions that never arrive. Each attempt is louder than the last, yet less effective. What they do not understand is that escalation only reveals loss of control. The harder they push, the clearer it becomes that authority has slipped away. Others begin to notice, not because you speak, but because you do not. Not because you defend yourself, but because you no longer need to. Your composure stands in contrast to their urgency. Your calm exposes their agitation. Your restraint highlights their instability. The difference becomes visible without explanation. This is when the narcissist understands the truth they tried to avoid. The target did not disintegrate. The target disengaged. And in disengagement, power shifted. They now occupy the position they assigned to you. Uncertain, reactive, preoccupied with perception. Their confidence erodes as they realize the narrative no longer bends to their will. They recognize something even more unsettling. Your strength did not come from resistance or retaliation. It came from alignment with truth. You were never trying to defeat them. You were moving beyond them. This realization destabilizes them completely. It means their manipulation failed. Their effort produced the opposite of its intention. Their control narrative collapsed under its own weight. The grave they intended for you does not open beneath your feet. It opens beneath their own, formed by obsession, escalation, and the inability to accept loss of influence. This collapse does not arrive with spectacle. It arrives with recognition. They cannot provoke what no longer engages. They cannot dominate what no longer participates. And so they face the quiet, irreversible truth. The person they targeted stands intact. The one unraveling is themselves. It's showtime when consequences begin to unfold in public. What was once managed quietly behind closed doors begins to surface not through accusation, but through consequence. This is the phase the narcissist fears most, because it cannot be negotiated, redirected, or controlled. Consequences do not announce themselves dramatically. They arrive through absence. Influence begins to thin. Credibility weakens. The certainty they once projected no longer holds weight. What was once assumed is now questioned. The narcissist feels this shift before it becomes visible to others. They sense that conversations no longer follow their lead. Decisions are made without their input. Their presence no longer anchors the room the way it once did. Public consequence does not require public exposure. It works through quiet withdrawal. Invitations stop coming. Trust becomes conditional. People listen, but they do not commit. Respect is replaced by caution. What unsettles the narcissist is not rejection. It is irrelevance. They were prepared to defend themselves against attack. They were not prepared to be slowly bypassed. The narratives they relied on begin to lose traction. Stories that once persuaded now raise questions. Statements that once commanded agreement now invite silence. The authority they assumed was permanent begins to erode. This is not punishment imposed by others. It is the natural outcome of prolonged distortion. When image replaces integrity, exposure is inevitable not because someone seeks justice, but because inconsistency cannot sustain visibility. Over time, the gap between performance and reality becomes too wide to ignore. The narcissist attempts to intervene. They explain. They clarify. They reframe. But explanation without truth only multiplies suspicion. Each attempt to regain control highlights the loss of it. Others begin to recognize patterns. They notice how often blame shifts. They see how responsibility is deflected. They recall moments that once felt confusing and now feel coherent. This recognition spreads quietly, not through gossip, but through discernment. People begin to trust their own perception rather than the narcissist's presentation. Meanwhile, you remain unchanged. You are not vindicating yourself. You are not correcting the record. You are not pointing to their failures. Your composure allows consequences to speak without interruption. This is where showtime takes its true meaning. Not spectacle, but visibility. Not humiliation, but accountability. Not revenge, but alignment. What unfolds publicly is not a dramatic fall. It is a steady loss of influence, a gradual narrowing of space, a diminishing ability to shape outcomes. The narcissist realizes they can no longer control how they are perceived. The audience they once curated now observes independently. The stage they once managed now exposes imbalance. They feel trapped in visibility they cannot escape. Every action is noticed, every inconsistency is remembered. The margin for manipulation disappears. This is the cost of targeting someone grounded in truth. By drawing attention outward, they invited scrutiny inward. By forcing visibility onto another, they created visibility for themselves. Public consequence does not require condemnation. It requires time. And time has done its work. The narcissist stands in a position they never intended to occupy, seen, measured, and no longer protected by confusion. What once empowered them now restrains them. The stage is still there, the light is still on, but the performance no longer persuades. This is the moment they understand what cannot be undone. Consequences have begun to unfold, not as punishment, but as order being restored. You never took the stage, yet you became the evidence. What unsettles the narcissist most is not confrontation. It is the realization that you never stepped onto the stage they prepared for you, yet the story still turned in your favor. They expected defense. They anticipated explanation. They assumed you would need to justify yourself publicly in order to survive. But you did not. You refused to participate in the performance. You did not compete for narrative control. You did not attempt to manage perception the way they did. Instead, you lived. That choice altered everything. By staying grounded, you removed yourself from the theater of manipulation. You did not deny what happened, but you also did not dramatize it. You allowed time, consistency, and character to speak where argument would have failed. And slowly, without announcement, you became the reference point. People began to compare outcomes rather than stories. They observed who remained stable and who became reactive. They noticed who carried peace and who carried urgency. You never claimed righteousness. You never declared victory. Yet your life began to testify. This is how evidence works in moral reality. It does not argue, it accumulates. Your steadiness became visible, not because you demanded recognition, but because it endured. While narratives shifted around you, your posture did not. While accusations multiplied, your conduct remained unchanged. That consistency carried weight. The narcissist, who relied on movement and reaction, could not compete with stillness. They had prepared for resistance, not for absence. They had planned for conflict, not for disengagement. And in your refusal to take the stage, the spotlight adjusted itself. Observers did not need persuasion. They saw the difference. They saw that you did not need to recover publicly because you were not broken privately. They noticed that you did not scramble for validation because your sense of worth was not dependent on approval. This contrast became undeniable. The narcissist's urgency began to look excessive. Their explanations began to feel defensive. Their insistence on being misunderstood began to sound rehearsed. Meanwhile, you continued living with quiet coherence, not perfect, not untouched, but aligned. This alignment did what confrontation never could. It exposed motive without accusation. It revealed imbalance without commentary. You became evidence not of their failure, but of truth's endurance. This is why the narcissist grows increasingly unsettled. They cannot discredit what does not engage. They cannot undermine what does not compete. Your existence contradicts their narrative. They tried to present you as unstable, yet you remained composed. They tried to paint you as weak, yet you endured. They tried to define you through distortion, yet time revealed your character intact. The story they wrote about you could not survive your life, and so the focus shifts, no longer on what you said or did not say, but on what they cannot explain. Why did their efforts produce no collapse? Why did targeting you result in their own unraveling? This question haunts them, because it exposes a truth they avoided from the beginning. You were never sustained by image. You were grounded in something deeper. You did not win by overpowering them. You won by not becoming them. And in the moral order of the Christian conscience, that difference matters. Scripture does not teach that the faithful must always speak loudly. It teaches that they must stand firmly. It teaches that endurance outlasts deception, and that truth, when lived, requires no defense. You did not need to take the stage. The stage came to you, not through applause, but through clarity, not through praise, but through recognition. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching. The one who tried to control the story lost control of themselves. The one who refused the performance became the proof. When light finally wins and order is restored, there is always a stillness after judgment has done its work. Not the silence of fear, but the quiet of restored order. It is the moment when chaos no longer speaks the loudest, and truth stands without opposition. Light does not announce victory with noise. It simply remains when darkness can no longer justify itself. This is how divine justice concludes its work. Not through spectacle, but through alignment. Not through humiliation, but through consequence. What was false has exhausted itself, and what was true has endured. The narcissist does not disappear dramatically. There is no final scene, no public confession, no moment of redemption forced into view. Instead, there is absence. Influence fades. Control dissolves. The audience moves on. They remain surrounded by what they built, yet disconnected from meaning. Noise replaces peace. Activity replaces purpose. The stage grows quiet, not because they are punished, but because the performance no longer matters. This is not your victory to celebrate. It is a reality to witness. You were never meant to stand over their fall. You were meant to walk away whole. And you have. What once threatened to destroy you has been absorbed into wisdom. What once demanded answers has been answered by time. What once required defense has been resolved by truth. You now stand on the other side of understanding, not because everything was explained, but because nothing remains unresolved within you. This is the gift that justice gives the faithful. Not revenge, but release. Not validation, but peace. Not dominance, but freedom. You no longer measure your life by what was taken. You measure it by what was preserved. Your conscience remains intact. Your faith remains uncorrupted. Your identity remains anchored. This is the quiet triumph of righteousness. Scripture does not promise that the innocent will never be targeted. It promises that truth will never be defeated. It teaches that light does not need to chase darkness. It simply outlasts it. And that is what has happened here. The pit that was meant to bury you became the evidence that exposed them. The stage that was meant to elevate illusion became the place where falsehood collapsed. The attention they sought revealed the order they could not escape. Justice did not rush, but it arrived. Now, as you move forward, you do so without bitterness. You forgive without forgetting. You remember without reliving. You trust without naivety. You are no longer shaped by what happened to you. You are shaped by what you refuse to become. This is how light wins. Not by destroying darkness, but by refusing to imitate it. The story ends, not with their silence, but with your clarity. Not with their loss, but with your restoration. And that is enough. Because when truth has spoken last, it speaks forever.